This is the Policy Committee meeting for October 5th, 2020. And we have on the agenda the 25 minutes for introductions. We're not going to do that. We've got a very full agenda. So I'm going to ask the board members to introduce themselves, and then the student representatives to this committee introduce themselves. Okay, I will start this. I'm Rita Moore on the school board and chair of this committee.
Bailey, I think, is next alphabetically.
There we go. Well, J before S. Scott Bailey, board member.
Julia Brim-Edwards, board member and committee member.
Jackson Weinberg, student representative to this committee.
Parker Myris, the Benson rep.
I'm Nathaniel Shu, student rep to the board.
Okay, is that it? And my cat has made his presence. This is Bernie, who attends every meeting religiously. Okay, so we're going to move right into the agenda, and I'm going to ask staff members to introduce yourself whenever you first speak up. So we're going to start off with some staff updates. Starting off with the student suicide prevention policy. So who's going to take the lead on that one? Amy,
there you go. Amy.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Awesome. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mila Rodriguez Adair, and I use she, her pronouns, and I identify as Latinx. And I'm a district-wide school social worker with Student Success and Health Department. I have many, many buckets of work. However, my focus and my attention is around the mental health and wellness of BIPOC students and LGBTQIA+ students, in addition to supporting the implementation of Senate Bill 52, so Addie's Act. Amy, can you introduce yourself? And then I'll have Brenda introduce herself, and then I'll turn on the PowerPoint.
Amy Rana, Student Success and Health. I have the opportunity to work every day with Mila. Hi, Scott. I also engage in lots of different buckets of work within the department. I get to support Mila's work as well as our crisis recovery work, substance use coordinator, our threat assessment work, our new social workers, and our mental health partnerships. So we have a great team, and I'm super excited to be back and as Mila's support person as she presents today. And I also use she, her pronouns, and I identify as a white woman.
Thank you, Mila and Amy. Brenda Martnick, Chief of Student Support Services. I use pronouns she and her, and I identify as a white woman. And I'm very excited that Mila and Amy are here to present our engagement process for Senate Bill 52 and Addie's Act around the policy that we're trying to get approved for the district. It's an extremely important one. It is not anything that we haven't already been doing. We've been doing a ton of this work for years, thanks to Amy Rona, mostly. As of late, also Mila and a number of other staff. And so we're actually really excited that this policy is getting off the ground, because it not only supports the work that we have been doing for years, it provides a little bit more teeth for us to be able to enact a number of other really important professional development opportunities for our staff in order to keep students safe. So I will turn the time back over to Mila.
Thank you, Brenda. In addition to what my colleagues are speaking to, one thing that I do like to name when I do talk about this particular bill and when I'm talking about suicide prevention is that we're talking about such a heavy subject. And so there might be some points of activation for you. And so if you need to take care of yourself, you need to turn your camera off. If you need to take a deep breath, please do so, as suicide prevention affects all of us, not just our students. So you should have received last Monday something that I called Draft Senate Bill 52 Addie's Act Community Engagement Plan. And so that was for your review. I put a very quick and robust PowerPoint together, but really, honestly, it's mostly for me so that it can help me frame the conversation. Everything that you'll see in the PowerPoint is something that is in that plan. So nothing new, nothing that's shifted, mostly so that it can provide some guidance for me. So bear with me as I put it on, and I won't be able to see y'all's faces, which is fine. And so if you have any questions, if you don't mind, waiting till the end, that way I can actually see y'all's faces and can actually respond to all of you. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet?
No.
Well, then I did not hit present. That was my bad. Okay, so now. Okay, can you all see it now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So something that I'd like to start is providing a little bit of, I know Amy and I were here back in July, and I wanted to start again with providing some context regarding Addie's Act, Senate Bill 52. And in everything that I do, I try to provide context and really providing kind of like a starting point, a baseline of why we're all here. We're here today because of the loving memory of Addie Staub. Amy and I had the pleasure of speaking to Addie's father back in September 21st, just to hear more of his story, Addie's story, and where he's at as a parent, and giving feedback to us as PPS in regards to suicide prevention and this particular policy. So something that I wanted to mention about Addie is that they identified as they, them, and transgender. And in some news articles, they also go by she, her. However, I was waiting to hear from their dad regarding what gender pronouns to use for today. So I'm going by they, them in regards to how they presented themselves in the past. They were a student at Portland Public Schools who completed suicide in summer 2017. They were identified by their parent as a fierce advocate for equality in their school and in their community. Worked very closely with the local agencies in regards to supports that were identified for LGBTQIA+ students. Prior to their departure, they wrote a quote unquote self-destructive letter or a paper in which they were worried about their future safety, as how they identified in their paper. Lon, Addie's dad, reported that the teacher who read the essay never reported this concern to the parents until after the fact. And so that's actually what sparked Addie's parents to basically begin this level of advocacy through legislation, not just at PPS, but to really basically fight for getting statewide suicide prevention supports across all of our school districts. And so one thing that Addie's family wrote in regards to Addie, they identified that Addie found purpose in advocating for others. So we'd like to honor her by sharing her story and continuing her efforts to promoting a world of kindness and acceptance. And so that's who we are focusing on and why we're all here today and talking about Addie's Act, Senate Bill 52. And in addition to that, I'm a parent of a Black child at PPS. And so I'm solely committed, in addition to making sure that BIPOC students are also served effectively and equitably in regards to suicide prevention, as we know that it's a population that also suffers, especially now more than ever. But we're here today because of Addie and the supports and advocacy of their parents. Some of a quick background of this particular policy. We know and understand as PPS that suicide is the leading cause of death for young people, and even more youth consider and attempt suicide more than ever. The possibility of suicide and suicidal ideation requires vigilant attention from our school staff. So by staff, not just school social workers, school psychs, but every single person that we encounter within the school system. Like I said earlier, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color students and LGBTQI plus students are considered populations at risk for suicide, not just by research, but in this bill. It is essential to seek student feedback regarding this policy, which was why I'm grateful that this policy is asking for student feedback. And so as a result, we must engage in best practices to provide school-wide suicide prevention and intervention strategies in an effort to minimize suicidal ideation and prevent attempts and deaths within our district. We also must work to create safe and nurturing environments that increase connections and build strengths and self-worth in students. And these efforts will directly align with the PPS racial equity and social justice framework, and have been, and we've been trying to intentionally ensure that that happens. However, the emotional wellness of students greatly impacts school attendance and educational success. Therefore, this policy is based on research and best practices in suicide prevention and has been adopted with understanding that suicide prevention activities decrease suicide risk, increase help-seeking behavior, and those that are at risk for suicidal ideation in order to decrease suicidal behaviors. Amy, do you mind giving us a brief history of what has been done even prior to Addie's Act and Senate Bill 52? As Brenda so eloquently put it, that you have done an incredible amount of work and advocacy prior to us getting here. So I'm wondering if you can walk us through that.
I appreciate those kind words. I would give a lot of credit also to our school staff, right, who are really like there on the ground doing the work. Thank you. So we know that we're talking about the engagement policy today, but we really, or the engagement plan, but we really wanted to continue to give some context for that engagement. And as we're working with students and families and staff and getting their feedback, a couple of things that we all need to be reminded of. I think one is that Tier 1, we've been doing SEL and suicide prevention curricula in schools, and that just continues to grow. And what this policy is going to do is help put a system in place to track those Tier 1 suicide prevention curricula efforts. So that will be one of the changes. Tier 2, we've had BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, student interest, student identity groups. Those are also continuing to grow. We consider those suicide prevention activities. And what this policy is going to do is really reinforce those Tier 2 suicide prevention strategies and outreach really specifically to those student groups and other student groups that are providing those kinds of supports. Tier 3, we've had a suicide screening implemented since the 2014-15 school year. Each year, the submission of those forms increases. We regularly get school counselors, social workers, and school psychologists trained in ASSIST, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills and Training. We also continue to train them on how to support students as they return to school, post-hospitalization and or mental health treatment. And what this policy is going to do is really increase our access to train all staff in basic suicide prevention and support. So again, we're continuing to build off of a lot of the work that's already been done, and in getting some of that feedback, we will continue to make this policy even more robust.
Thanks, Amy. So as we move on with our community engagement approach, something that both Amy and I really had to understand and name are the considerations as far as how we are approaching and engaging our students and actually school staff in this particular plan. So moving from being in person to this home-based distance learning has created a digital divide as far as who has access to use of or impact as far as the devices that we have available to them and or internet. And so engagement with students and school staff is completely different. And so the goal has been for both Amy and I, so how do we decrease the digital divide as much as possible as we're approaching families and students and staff regarding all of this. However, as students have made it back to school virtually, the students' emotional well-being, their physical health, and family health have been of the utmost importance of PPS staff in regards to the feedback that we're hearing. And of course, the work that we're implementing, we do know that is of the utmost importance. Additionally, students with intersecting identities of being Black, immigrant English language learners and LGBTQIA and special education have been disproportionately affected by continued race-based trauma in our society in our current times, therefore continues to create, a different level of consideration as we're thinking about, our approach to engagement. So given all of this and all these considerations in mind, the feedback has been pushed out. The gathering of feedback, the majority of it has been pushed out to October, November is what most individuals have requested that we approach groups by then, if not later, given that they're trying to get their bearings going, that they're trying to get connected to students, that they're trying to make sure that all students have access to a computer, access to internet, access to all things health. And so we have taken these considerations and taking them into and collaborated with our school social worker, SOSA, our COSA, and our school psychologist. We worked with them and assured that their weekly newsletter offered information for us to get connected to student groups who are interested in providing feedback to a suicide prevention policy. So that was one of our ways that we were able to get connected to gathering that student feedback. So far, we have actually been able to meet with Lincoln High School in their particular group. We met with them October 1st. We will hopefully be meeting with George Middle School, one of their groups, October 12th. And in Roosevelt High School, that's to be determined. However, and we'll get into the actual tables, the tables will indicate a very thorough plan as far as when we're actually meeting with them. We also sent out a student affinity group email to all of the advisors that are in the list that Shanice gave me last year in the spring in regards to who are the advisors. So that was my way of also getting connected to those particular student groups. Most of them have not responded, but those that have responded are in that plan. And those are the ones that are also identified waiting to October and or November. Amy, and I have worked really closely with the Oregon Statewide Alliance to Prevent Suicide working group that has been getting together for this particular Senate bill, Addie's Act. There's monthly consultation working groups, and Amy and I are in attendance of that, where either we are participating we participated in the rulemaking and or helped us with outreaching to other organizations that are part of the alliance, such as Lines for Life. Given that Lines for Life was one of the asks, I believe one of the board members had asked us the last time to get connected to Lines for Life. We have not heard from them. However, we are hoping that the coordinators that facilitate the statewide alliance can actually get us connected to them so that we can further our feedback and engagement with that particular working group. In addition to that was our way of getting connected to Lon Staub, Addie's father. Lon was just voted into being a member of that, or an executive committee member of that working group. And that's how I was able to get connected to him, express to him our interest and our desire to hear his voice, to hear his perspective in regards to why he advocated for this policy, in regards to what we could do better in regards to this policy, in regards to how he can provide some feedback to us besides, the verbiage, but anything else that he is interested in. And so we actually spent a really solid, solid hour with him, and he gave us some really solid feedback. But mostly and Amy will get into this, but a thematic thing that came up for him is the accountability piece. Who's holding folks accountable to this policy and implementation, and making sure that all schools are implementing what they're supposed to implement. So that was one of his biggest feedback loops. And in recognizing and considering equity during online engagement, here are some of the things that we kind of considered or are considering as we are engaging with students and student groups and the folks, the school staff. We're asking them and letting them know that we are more than happy to record meetings if necessary in case students need to give feedback after the fact, that we're more than happy to translate meetings if relevant, that are relevant to their languages if they need it. So that's been something that I've been asking folks ahead of time if that's something that they need. Of course, centralizing and our voices, our BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ voices, recognizing the privileges of people in the organizing group. So something that I tend to do when I go to working groups is naming my positionalities, my name, my role, and how I show up in those spaces. One example was how I introduced myself when we came to this meeting. I named my gender pronoun and also my race and ethnicity. I'm pretty ethnically ambiguous, and so sometimes people don't necessarily know that I identify as Latinx. And so owning and addressing those privileges during those groups is super essential to gain and build the level of trust with this organizing group, with this organized group. And also understanding and acknowledging the long history of PPS asking for community feedback. And by what we mean by that is that we do know that people have been going and asking for feedback from students and staff. And so one of the things that they've said in return is, yes, thank you for asking, and we're inundated with giving feedback. We want to see action. Is there anything in return that you can give us in regards to the feedback that we're providing to you? So we are coming in with that level of acknowledgement as well, and also trying to gauge the level of comfort given that we're all online giving feedback. So however that looks like for them, this is also a very difficult topic, and so kind of basically addressing the trigger warnings ahead of time, making sure that they are okay with turning off their camera if they choose to do so, communicating through chat if that's how they choose to do so. And then, of course, clearly defining my role and Amy's role when we're going into these working groups and asking for their feedback. But most importantly, something that most people will probably know about Amy and I is that we do try to invest time and energy in relationship building. And so I know that ever since I've been hired since last year, that's something that I've been really focusing on, is really engagement and building those relationships district-wide so that we could get to where we are today. So those are some of the few things that we've considered along the way in regards to equity as we're engaging in an online platform. So in your document on page 3, you'll see table A. So there's a couple pages of table A that talks about the stakeholder analysis for engagement. And here you'll find the working groups that we were able to connect with, the folks that are leading these particular working groups, and the stakeholders as far as the feedback that we're gathering and the level of engagement. So those that have been able to respond, those that have completed their engagement, and the accountability loop, basically who's responsible in connecting back with this group, either Amy or I. And so this is just kind of like a picture of it, but you're more than welcome to go back to that table, and it thoroughly addresses all of those working groups and intersectionalities and timeframes that we're working from as far as when we're hoping to gather the feedback in these working groups. Table B begins to address the actual feedback that we were able to get. We have some feedback, but like I said, we are not. We will come back again at another time, I believe, to give or to kind of give a where we're at with the feedback that we've collected. But Amy, do you want to talk about some of the thematic things that have been coming up with some of the feedback that we have been gathering?
Yeah, I would say, I know that this is just the beginning, and we will return with a full engagement plan and the feedback that's collected. But some of the themes that have emerged at this point that's been really helpful in thinking about the policy is students asking about having suicide prevention curricula that gives them the opportunity to practice connection skills with their peers. What do I do if my peer is suicidal? What do I say? How do I get them to a helping adult without ruining our relationship? So can we be sure to have some sort of lessons curricula opportunity within our classes in our school that will help support that? So that's been one theme that's come up. The other theme is having our trusted adults in the building all be trained, because our trusted adults aren't necessarily counselors, psychs, and social workers. Sometimes they are. Often they are, but that's not always the case. And if my trusted adult is a coach or is the librarian, I want to make sure that they are also trained so that I don't go tell them something that's really hard for me to share and then they don't know what to do. And so when they see in the policy that getting all adults trained is part of it, that I visibly see them kind of have a sigh of relief when it comes to that. And then I would say the third theme that isn't necessarily directly mentioned in the policy, but something that's come up is a low barrier access to resources. So like, what resources does my school have? How do I get access to them? Who do I talk to? That kind of thing. So those are a couple of themes that at this point I've seen emerging, but we're super excited to continue to collect this information from our stakeholders.
Okay, so that was a brief overview of the document you all received last Monday, I believe. I don't know if you all have any questions or anything that's coming up for you, but that's so far what we have as far as our engagement plan. And we're super excited to engage with our students in the near future.
Okay, thank you. So just to clarify, for all the reasons you've mentioned, you're probably going to be doing this engagement this month and next month, right? Okay, and that's going to be, and then I'm assuming we're going to see how it goes, and when you get, you may or may not be able to finish by the end of November, but if we could get some sort of status update at that point, that would be helpful, I think.
Oh yeah, totally, absolutely.
So are there any questions from committee members? It's a very thorough memo, so thank you for that. It was it's impressive. Any questions?
Director Moore?
Okay.
Director Brim Edwards, go ahead. And
No, I was going to say, go ahead.
So just one, thank you. Tremendous amount of work. And on the one hand, yeah, let's get the official policy passed. It's great that you're already doing a lot of things in that, and I recognize that. And two, if you need another month to do more thorough outreach, you know, this is important stuff to get right. Secondly, and this is I've done this with a whole lot of policies. I know it's a draft policy. When we get to a final, and I'm glad to help editing, having some complete sentences. Sometimes some of the sentences aren't complete, or there's a passive tense, which gets back to accountability. Whose responsibility is this? I think just will help clarify things. And in particular, for example, and again, this gets back to the accountability piece that was raised. If there's an update once a year to make sure that we're doing best practices, a short report to the board, for example, might be a marker that we put in there as our little bit of the accountability piece going forward. And due to extenuating circumstances, I haven't been able to completely read. I think there's a draft of it was a guidelines for staff. But I know it's just in the early part, like there was a discussion of how to tell parents and bring that in. I know that's a really challenging piece of the work. It wasn't clear to me from reading that on, yes, this is going to happen. It was more like, we need to do this. And so if I was a staff person reading that, I'd be unclear as to whether, yeah, this has to happen, or I really, really want it to happen because it's important, and it, you know, there's a need for it to happen is different from, hey, we got to make this happen. And my wife teaches high school, and she's been in this, and it's been interesting to listen to her experiences. The training and support that from counseling staff really helped her navigate this. So just wanted to throw those reactions out there. But again, we're talking about making something really good, be really nailing down the final pieces of it. So thanks again for your work.
I appreciate you naming that too, the parent piece, because that is something parent guardian piece that Mila and myself and others in our department consult on frequently. How to have that conversation, how to have the conversation with the student to get to the conversation with the parent guardian. So that is absolutely near and dear to our heart. It is best practice, of course, unless there's some safety concern, but otherwise we have a ton of guidance and toolkit information for folks around supporting how to have those conversations, both with the student and with the parent guardian. So appreciate you bringing that up.
So I had a couple questions, but I'm going to start by just thanking the team for the really thorough set of materials we received. And so, because it looks like we'll, I think, have just a really diverse set of feedback from the community. And I recognize how challenging that is during COVID. Just a question, just so I understand what people are giving, what stakeholders are giving feedback on. Is it just the policy, or is it the policy and the language for the student handbook, or is it the curriculum, or because the policy is relatively short. So I'm wondering I couldn't tell from looking at the community engagement plan. I thought it was really well defined, the purpose of why we were doing it and what we're going to ask. But I guess the question is it just the policy? I mean, that would technically be it, but is it the policy and the sort of related materials?
Julia, I actually appreciate you asking. That's something that Amy and I were trying to get clarity from the last board committee as well, as far as what kind of feedback you all were seeking from. However, in meeting with Denise, I think I met with her maybe twice after the fact, it seemed clear that we were just trying to seek feedback, because one of the things that that we told, I think Liz and I think Mary, is that we put it actually in, I put it in the document on page 3. I said, Senate Bill 52 is a legislatively mandated policy and does not have a lot of room for adaptation. When asking the staff, students, and families and community stakeholders for feedback, this will be made clear so people know ahead of time as to what can be changed or not. And so most of the feedback that we've been gathering, we're hoping to be using it in the administrative directive, mostly because the policy, there's certain things that we just can't change. And so that was one of the things that I was trying to gain clarity the last time I was in the policy committee. I'm like, oh, were they asking for feedback for the policy specifically, even though we can't change the policy, or what were they asking feedback for? So to answer your question, I think we're all on the same page that we're asking for as far as implementation, direction, and they did look at the policy. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Amy, but they did look at the policy, gave some feedback, but what we're noticing is it's less about the verbiage and more about the implementation and their experiences and what they're hoping to receive within this policy, has been my experience.
And Mila, I so appreciate the thorough thinking about what are we asking for and what are we going to get. And Mary and I also, when you have completed the engagement work or at any point along that journey, and there are things that emerge that may not be contemplated now, and the question about where does that go, we are happy to be thought partners with you and kind of sort through feedback you get. And you have to comply with the statute, but sometimes you can also add to, as long as it doesn't undermine or contradict what's required. So we're happy to be thought partners in that with you along the way as you get that feedback from the community and from students.
Yeah, I guess that's just as a follow-up to my question. I guess I would view as like, hopefully if there's something that comes out of the community feedback that goes to the policy, which is the broader overarching piece, as long as it's not in conflict with the statute, that would be great to get, so that the community can not only see how they've informed the implementation, administrative directive, but the policy as well. And again, if it's not in conflict with the statute, absolutely, share recommendations, because, sometimes the ones that come from OSBA are just a little bit generic. So it doesn't feel like PPS, doesn't have that PPS values and feel to it. So especially like in the lead-in. So another question, or just a request, I guess. So you had a PowerPoint, which I thought was great. And I'm wondering if that could just be paired with the materials on the website, because I think it gives more context, like the history, and I think some useful parameters and guidance for community engagement. It just seems like it makes it kind of brings the whole package together versus, just all the different materials. I think, like, why are we doing this? It frames it up in some way. And then, and I don't know if this is an appropriate policy in the policy or where it fits in. But and I'm not quite sure how to ask this question. So how would we know if this is an effective policy? I mean, I think my sense is what we'd all say is that we reduce or eliminate the incidences of suicide among our students. And so how will we know if we got this right, or if there's things that we should change? So, and I don't know if you've thought about that. I mean, we have a law that tells us one thing to do, but again, like how do we know that we've ultimately landed on something that's effective?
Also many great questions, Mila. I don't know if you want to.
I think it goes back to Lon's feedback, right? He wants to see accountability. And I think, Scott, you had mentioned a yearly review of where we're at with things. I think that will also keep us accountable to making sure that we are coming back and assessing where are we at with the policy, where we're at with the implementation, and what's working, what's not working. There are things that we are currently doing in regards to that already. So this is just a very quick example. It's our suicide screening form. It went from being on paper to virtual. And along the way, we've been asking for consistent feedback from the users that are using it. And so we're making those changes as we're getting the feedback. And I would say that would be the same for everything else. One thing that we're hoping that we get, in addition to the supports with training in regards to this policy getting approved, is getting supports who can actually understand developing a system to like the accountability piece. And that's like 3 different jobs in that piece. And I can't do that by myself. I need a person who can set up a system. I need another person who's going to keep an eye on who's followed up with the data, who's followed up with the training for each school staff member, literally each school staff member, making sure that the mandatory trainings move from mandatory to required trainings, making sure that we have a system that assesses that out. So I think that I'm hoping that from this policy, we can get some support around those pieces in order for those accountability things are put into place, because that's my worry as well, Julia. But that there are things that we're changing as we're getting feedback. So that's one thing. Amy, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I mean, we've already started to, I don't know what version of the policy that we have posted that's available right now, but we've already started to make changes and additions.
Absolutely. Based
on feedback, that accountability piece. So we're already starting to really build that out. I think additionally, you ask how we can tell if it's working. So we 5-6 years ago said, here's the suicide screening tool. And the first year got 25, 30 over the course of the year. And by last year, we had over 500. And some people panic at that. And we think, no, like staff are asking the question, they're connecting with kids. We know that kids experience suicidality and ideation, and we want to make sure we're asking the question. They know there are supportive adults to help them out there. So So that's one piece. I think getting feedback from staff around their comfort level in talking about this. So right now, right, if we were to ask staff, how comfortable would you feel if a student told you that they were thinking about killing themselves? You might get a very different answer, I hope, than a year from now, where they would say, we really feel like we're in a place where we could have that conversation, whether it's with my student, my family member, my neighbor. So I think those are some different ways we could tell as well, as you bring that up.
Julia, one thing we can do is ask the Oregon Alliance to see if they have something developed and/or a framework to work from as well. I mean, they're working with all the districts across the district. I'm assuming this is a question that's going to come up or has already come up, and maybe they already have a framework that they're recommending. And I'd be more than happy to go back to the Oregon Alliance and actually ask them specifically, are there best practices to address that particular data factor? I can do that as well.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
And this is great. One last thing. I'm wondering, and this is a great question, Julie. I'm wondering if in our annual student survey, if there are questions that can help us keep track of, yes, I'm familiar with resources I can turn to, or something like that. It might not be specific to suicide prevention, but broader. I know we've got some questions along those lines, but that's another marker we can use around SEL in general.
Yep, great idea. And we do actually have some youth behavior survey, YRBS survey data already that we'll be able to do some comparisons to that one of Jenny Whitcomb's grants.
Okay, I'm going to interject here because we're going a bit long. So thank you for coming back and giving us this information. We look forward to hearing from you again in a couple of months. And I'm assuming that I mean lots of good questions about kind of the language in the policy, and I'm assuming that's going to be amended as you get more input. So. So one last question, though. My understanding is that the deadline to produce this policy established by the statute was completely unrealistic, and it was July 1st. So we are substantially behind schedule. I think mostly because the schedule was unrealistic. So I just wanted to point that out because the next exercise we're going to go through is around setting the work plan for the committee. So as we come up with sequencing the work, identifying the priorities, which policies we're going to be focusing on, and then the sequencing of consideration of policies, we need to take into consideration deadlines on some of these compliance issues. So anyway, okay, let's stop it here, and we will move on to the next update.
Chair Moore?
Yeah?
Before we move on, maybe one thing, just looking at the timeline, and it sounds like that the most of the comments are around the AD and not the policy. Maybe we could move ahead with take whatever the latest after the next meeting, the next round of comments on the policy, and get the policy at least first read so that that's happening while engagement's happening. I mean, it's just, if there's not a lot of comments on the actual policy itself, but it's more the implementation, that may be a way in which we can move both processes along. Just an idea.
Well, I'm reluctant to short circuit the community engagement process. We're telling people it's about the policy. So I don't want anybody to think we're being disingenuous about our desire to get feedback on the actual policy. So I would be, I personally, I would prefer to let the community engagement process proceed before we move ahead with the first reading of the policy. So we're going to be hearing back in 2 months. And I think at that point, we can find out whether there is input on the actual policy requiring, I mean, it's a brand spanking new policy. So it's not even a question of amending it. We're writing this thing. But I think if at the end of November, we hear back that most of the comments you're getting are about implementation rather than the policy itself, I think that's a very different situation, and we could move ahead at that point. So that would be my suggestion.
I'm going to send some just notes on so I can get it into the process. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for having us, and thank you, Mila, for all of your amazing, incredible hard work on getting this all organized. And so appreciate the time with you.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so I want to move on to the next update, which is on student conduct and discipline. And I think this will be a fairly short update.
I can make it very short. It's really status quo continues, that there is a pending grievance that relates to this same subject matter. There is mutual intent on all sides to work through this issue with PAT, but it's coming behind the current discussions that are happening about, it's hard to call it reentry because we've already entered the same reentry discussions. So it is a topic of present conversation, but it's really not feasible to move forward in part with the policy while this other piece is sitting out there.
Okay. Okay, so we will stay tuned. Okay, so the next agenda item is on work plan. And I'm going to make a suggestion to the committee. It appears that we have, I think probably for the very first time, we have a full complement of people who want to testify in public comment. And I believe all of them are about the climate policy proposal. So my suggestion is that we move up the public comment to happen now before we talk about the work plan. Is there any objection to that?
No.
Mike? Mike, did you have an objection?
You're on mute.
Okay, you're on mute. No, we can't hear you.
So I was just going to say thank you that we had told people that the public comment period was at the end of the meeting. So maybe some of the people that were prepared to testify might not be here. So
do you know if most of the people are here?
I can't tell. Let me see. I don't.
Okay,
I can't.
Well, are any of them here?
I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, one person. Go on, Car.
Oh, I was just looking through the list, but I don't see most everybody is not here yet.
Okay, all right. Then we'll stick with the schedule as is.
Thank you.
Okay. I was trying to make it easier on people, but if it's going to be harder, there's no point. Okay. So let's move right into the discussion on work plan. And so before we launch into this, I also want to say, you've probably noticed we have a very full schedule for this meeting. I'm hoping that we can get through the full agenda. At this point, I'm not sure we can, but I'd like to do the best that we can. So, so two things. One, I'm going to be kind of, I'm going to be enforcing the time limits pretty strongly. And I'm going to be asking people to be as efficient in their comments as possible. And if it looks like, I'm going to facilitate the discussion pretty strongly. And the other thing I would say is, given what we have in the queue, and the fact that I was working with staff in the last week or so to come up with a way to kind of visualize all of the policies that we have in the queue that we've already identified. And it ended up being kind of three-dimensional chess. So it's going to be a pretty complicated calculation about how we can most effectively prioritize our work this year. So I think it's probably likely that we are not going to be able to finalize this work plan today. But I would very much like us to get as far in the discussion as we possibly can to really highlight a body of work that we can do in the next, say, 4 months. Right? We really need to establish some clear priorities in the short term. So I've had to ratchet down my goals for the meeting, but we do have a lot on our plate, and we've got to be pretty efficient in deciding how we're going to spend our time. Okay, all that being said, I think we can launch. So I'm going to ask Liz, are you willing to kind of take the staff lead in this?
Absolutely. Yep. Do you want to put up the document that you prepared over the weekend, or do you want?
Okay. So we're reaching the limits of my technological expertise here. I've tried it before and failed.
I've got the documents pulled up. If I'm shareable, I can do that.
Okay. So there, we start from a place where all of these potential policies and amendments and creation of new policies is an important topic. So the rough cut that staff took at trying to categorize and prioritize is a difficult task, and one where we knew it was the first cut, but not any sort of final conclusion. So there we go. We also broke down the policies into compliance, like we are required to do this policy work, and then other policy making that follows. So this first section, and let me back up a little bit of process. And then we tried to assess what's the workload required to get through the policy making and engagement process, and how is that distributed among staff and board, just for an assessment of time as you're trying to figure out in what order you want to attack these various policy issues, and what's the capacity given how long some of them will or won't take. So you'll see the first chunk there, and what we sent out with the policy committee materials. Rita, who has the right side of your brain works better than mine, and so created a chart that's really pretty instead of a list. And you'll see student conduct and discipline, which is already in the mix and is on hold. So it's urgent, and we have some compliance related changes as well as some non-compliance related changes, but that really can't go forward until the PAT process is complete. Title IX, the foundation policy, which has some compliance, some not, some other recommended changes. Suicide prevention, which we just heard about. All students belong, which is the new ODE requirement for a policy at the end of the year that prohibits various forms of hate speech in the form of swastikas, nooses, other similarly destructive speech. And then comprehensive sexuality education, which is, I think, we're going to require probably the lightest load. So we decided to separate the two types of policies into this work has to be done to be compliant with current or coming deadlines, and then the discretionary. Would the committee like to have a conversation about the prioritization of the compliance piece, or would you? I would say that the comprehensive sexuality education and all students belong. There's a little bit of time, although I think the all students belong piece that deadline's going to be upon us quickly, and I don't think it's going to be a lot of work. We're waiting for the OSBA model policy, which was supposed to come out, I thought, late last week, but to my knowledge, I don't think we have it yet. I think Title IX is going to be a heavy lift because I think the federal regs that just came out and the state statutory requirements are not complementary. And from a user perspective, and you think about a student who has been through a traumatic experience, to try to sort out how those policies work is really hard for us to reconcile. We're also having conversations with Courtney on what may need to happen in Salem to help fix that, but we can only do the policy work right now that addresses those. I would say, like many school districts, we are not fully compliant on the federal side yet because of this additional work. Some of it we've taken care of by AD, some of it we actually need the policy. So I put that pretty high on the list. And the others I think we've talked about. The foundation one I think is maybe, I think we should do that work. I would put Title IX very high on the list as I'm looking at these. I'll pause for a moment for the committee members to ask questions or just say you want to talk about the next tranche.
Can I offer something on the Title IX policies? We HR and the Title IX director and I met with Jackie Sandmeyer, and she has promised us some assistance in helping to kind of coalesce the state and federal requirements into a simpler policy, as opposed to what we were originally looking at were multiple policies, which it's not user friendly at all. And so I think we're going to get some assistance with that, and I hope I'm going to follow up with her this week to see how soon we can get that.
Who is that you're working with?
Jackie Sandmeyer. She was for many years, she was working with the task force for Title IX compliance in the state of Oregon. She's now got an organization where they're providing kind of tactical assistance to districts on how to become more Title IX compliant. She also, her organization does trainings, and they've received some DOJ money, and so they're able to provide this more easily to the districts. And they've agreed to help us.
So can I ask a question? I'm making the assumption here that PPS is not the only school district in the state facing this dilemma, which suggests to me that OSBA should be all over this. Are they or are they not? Or okay, let me be clear. So is the dilemma that we have a pre-existing policy and we're trying to shoehorn some new stuff in it? Or is the essential dilemma that the state and the feds don't agree with each other?
There's tension between the state and federal definitions of sexual harassment. So under Title IX, it's a much narrower pool of people who would be covered under Title IX, and so the processes by which the state and then the federal procedures for handling those cases are different. And so it sets up a kind of a confusing process for any student or family who has to go through it, because you're like, well, why aren't I getting this? Or how does this work? And so I think that is a bit of a struggle. And so we're trying to, and Jackie recognizes it as well, and which is why the attempt to try to put this into a single policy, so it's easier for students to navigate, and students and employees and everyone to navigate.
So, question, first, just in terms of the color coding, does heavy for the staff workload also include public engagement, student engagement?
As applicable, yes. So we did not do yet another column, but and sometimes engagement is heavier for the board. We know sometimes the board will want to be on the front line of conversations related to certain, with staff support, of course, but on certain subject matters. So we considered both the policy writing and the engagement in ranking heavy, moderate, light.
So just thinking in terms of timelines, one is, it seems like we're dealing with so many policies where we want input. That's a lot of workload, and almost plus we're asking a lot from, again, people. You're asking me for more input on something else again. We probably need some thinking on how best to do that isn't making our staff crazy and the public also feeling burdened. And I'm looking at, the new policy mandated by the state. Again, if it's basically you're going to write a policy that's going to say this, that limits what kind of actual input we can have, as we just heard about with the suicide prevention. And I'm wondering how that affects our schedule and public input. Just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, I think, what we're trying to do as we continue to build out the engagement planning and process is to focus on the voices that may not have been, that in this subject area may not have been listened to, may not have been present or as present as they should be in prior policymaking efforts, and what voices and information are in service to the work that this committee has to do. And so when you're thinking about mandatory language to be compliant with an ODE deadline of 1/1/21, that might be one where there is pretty limited engagement now. There's more focus on communication, and there can be further amendment later if it were needed to be augmented, but we would work to be compliant by the deadline. And I think there was a similar discussion about that on suicide prevention this summer, but the decision was it was so important to get student voices and input on that, and that one we decided to wait and do the engagement work first. So I guess maybe the short answer, Director Bailey, is that I don't think there's a single cookie cutter method, but we need to be cognizant of capacity. We need to be cognizant of what you need to hear from in order to be informed policymakers, and what voices may not have been historically present in some of the work in these important areas.
And I guess that's also feedback for our partners at the state. If they're going to mandate something, I think most of them aren't thinking about public engagement at the local level, which takes time and resources, and that's a good use of time and resources. But to have a pretty short turnaround timeline to have something implemented doesn't go well with good public engagement. So that's maybe something Courtney can help with again going forward. So I just want to say clearly, yeah, we've got some mandates here. We need to get on them. They need to be on our work plan.
Following up on that, can I just clarify? Are there any potential sanctions attached to not meeting these statutory deadlines?
Public
there are, I think it is remote on the Title IX side, but could there be? Yes. I think that we are not, I think there are a lot of school districts who are, I think many school districts around the country are behind on the Title IX reg implementation. I think Oregon, again, there may be other states that have similar challenges of reconciling these two structures in ways that are make clear, respectful paths for students and staff that may make it a little harder here. So there could be potential penalties in an OCR process. I wouldn't want to test those. I would. So, I mean, I think you can go down there. I can't tell you exactly what they would be, but they almost all end in funding somewhere, right? So but frankly, more than that, it would be some sort of compliance plan, right? We would enter into a conciliation agreement. We would do these things. I mean, I don't think you get to the disastrous end game quickly. We'd like to be compliant as soon as possible across the board.
Yeah, really the cost there is that something happens to one of our students, they get unclear guidance. I'm much more worried about that than being slapped around by some other government agency. That this is a service to our.
Yeah, I agree, and we need to get it. We need to get those paths clear. I think we have some pretty thoughtful staff in this district who are wanting to make sure that students are heard, that allegations are investigated, that they are documented, that there is we are sharing resources that are required to be shared by state and or federal law with students who've been through the process. I think the requirements on both sides, so victim and accuser, we are trying to, again, reconcile what falls in the Title IX. You have to do certain things if it's a Title IX eligible allegation, and the state requirements are broader than that. And then I think you have the, like, what should PPS's policies be and how should we react to that? And how do we also think about our values and systems and processes that are, again, inconsistent with those, but are the way we want our students to be supported in these difficult situations. So that's the task.
So I have a couple comments. Can I make a couple comments on the compliance section? So I would be very supportive of moving ahead with the Title IX, and not because it's a light board work item, workload item, but just how long it took us to hire a Title IX director and the importance of it. It seems like the student conduct, the board has done most of its work already, so that seems already on its way. The student suicide prevention policy seems on its way. Very much support all students belong policy. It looks like we have a longer timeline. I do think it's important that we do something on the foundation policy for two reasons. We've sort of been operating with a pretty robust foundation, supporting a lot of different schools over the last 25 years, and our policy doesn't really connect with the current reality or the reality that's been in existence. It seems like we need to have a point of view on buying, whether foundations can purchase staff, as they've been able to do, not really within any sort of policy structure. And for sort of equity and transparency, and the fact that we now have a fund for Portland schools that the board and the board and staff are much more deeply involved in versus it being this entity over here that does something. So that's something to me that we should proceed with, because we're a year into the new foundation, like I say, and probably 25 years into allowing school communities to buy staff. And there's been lots of equity concerns raised about that. So having a clear set of values and a point of view around a policy would be helpful.
Okay. So let's, before we even attempt to come up with sort of a timeline.
Director Moore?
Yeah.
Did you want to get input from our student reps?
Oh, yeah, we're not, I was just talking about the compliance piece. Hang on. So I'm in terms of the compliance piece, I think it's, and maybe a lot of this in general, in terms of coming up, sequencing the work. I think a major factor is going to be staff capacity. And in particular in the compliance section, there's going to be kind of necessity, I think, the two groups of staff that are going to be primarily involved are going to be the legal office and student services. So that's a very heavy burden on mandated policies for those two offices. So I think when we're talking about sequencing the work, we're going to have to, especially since the board workload on all of with the exception of the foundation, the board workload is relatively minor as a component. So anyway, we're going to have to keep the staff capacity top of mind when we're talking about these compliance policies. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. I think it's Brenda's team that has the disproportionate subject matter expert burden here. I think, and Mary, I can say this because Mary and I aren't sitting in the same room where she can choke me, but I mean, I think the legal side, we will keep up with that as it intersects. That's sort of more of our steady diet, whereas this is often extra work on top of regular staff work. So, yeah. Okay. So let's.
We have lots of time, Liz. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying I'm glad we're in separate places right now. That's all I'm saying.
I was waiting for Mary to chime in.
Okay. So this next section is going to be looking at policies that are not mandated. It includes a mix of revising policies that already exist and creating new policies. So I think before we launch into a discussion, I'd like to invite the people who want to talk to us about the proposed climate policy. Are you prepared to talk to us? You've got up to 10 minutes, and can we do that now?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is Gerald Scrutchins, and if Amy is here, Amy Nitz is here, we are ready to go, and I know she's on someplace on this screen. So yes, we are ready. Okay.
So just to be clear, we're not, the committee today is not going to be speaking to the merits of any of these policies. Like, we're not going to be discussing the individual policies. We're trying to figure out what we're supposed to be doing over the next 8 months, 10 months, whatever it is. So if you can give us a kind of a quick summary of what the policy is about, its origins, why you think this is important, and how much work you've already put into this at this point. So you've got 10 minutes. Take it away. Who's going to speak?
Go ahead, Gerald.
Okay, great. Sorry, I didn't realize that I was up first, but that is excellent. So thank you, and I'm just going to read a few remarks here. But again, thank you for just allowing my voice to be amplified in the space, and you all just listening and supporting us. So again, my name is Gerald Scrutchins. I'm a member of the PPS Climate Justice Committee, a founding member of the Board of Directors for the Eco School Network, and a social studies teacher at Grant High School, and I'm a PPS parent as well. As a member of these communities, I can tell you that there is an urgent need for PPS to adopt a climate crisis response policy, one that is comprehensive, inclusive, rigorous, and reasonable, such as the draft policy that we are presenting today. Climate change is a central social and environmental justice issue of our time. It impacts not only PPS students and families, but the whole global community and multiple generations, especially our frontline communities. As those bearing the brunt of the first and worst impacts of climate change, our PPS students and families who are already facing an opportunity gap will suffer the most from the effects of climate change. In Portland, we can expect more frequent and intense heat waves, wildfires, flooding, and landslides. Climate change impacts will exacerbate other disparities, including greater risk of poor health, reduced access to housing, and underemployment, limited access to transportation options and parks, and other mortality rates as well. I teach AP Human Geography and US History at Grant this year, and I have co-led the students' Climate Justice Club at Harriet Tubman Middle School and now at Grant. My students are so aware that climate change is happening now. They are passionate about the need for action and they want to see it now. However, as educators and administrators, we fail to meet their basic needs required for basic knowledge on causes and solutions to mitigating climate change and promoting environmental justice. The introduction of climate justice curriculum was welcome, and students have responded overwhelmingly, both in terms of demand for the course and passion about the content. I've seen students overwhelmed by the current and future realities of climate change, racked with anxiety about their future. I see enormous disparities in students' opportunities to access climate justice education, especially opportunities for our historically underserved BIPOC community to learn how to advocate for change in their own neighborhoods, Portland, nationally, as well as globally. We need to elevate their voices and listen to what they are saying. They want to feel prepared for what their future climate is going to be. And they want to have some firsthand knowledge about what climate action looks like. Their potential to lead us to new climate solutions is huge, but we need to share with them a real world model of climate justice and climate action. We can do this through the schools themselves, the physical spaces where they come to learn. We need to both teach the concepts and demonstrate the actions needed to avoid leaving our students feeling hopeless and overwhelmed. As a parent of 2 PPS students, I share my own children's concern about what continued unchecked climate change will mean for their future lives, for the environment, as well as for the environment. PPS has a responsibility to lead on climate change action as a central institution in our community, as well as the school districts serving the largest number of young people in the city that's seen as a national and global leader for sustainability. The Eco School Network is a local nonprofit organization comprised of parents championing environmental initiatives in their schools. We currently work active in more than 50 PPS schools. As a director for the network, I can tell you that parents are hungry for PPS leadership on climate change as well as district level, and they will be the first in line to volunteer and to support next phase action in their neighborhood schools. And finally, in my work on the PPS Climate Justice Committee, our core mission is education and empowerment of students, teachers, and greater community around issues of social and environmental justice. We have made great strides on the education side, and a more comprehensive climate policy would be a tremendous complement to our work preparing and empowering students in this area. The Climate Justice Committee has reviewed the draft policy and looks forward to collaborating on its development and implementation. We know it won't be simple, and we appreciate there are substantial costs for implementation, but the cost of doing nothing will be grave. This is an amazing opportunity for PPS to lead by example to other school districts and organizations in our community or beyond, and to lead by example for our students, all of our students, but especially our students from frontline communities, to demonstrate to them the extent to which we care about them today and all of their tomorrows. And just a little bit of background knowledge on the PPS Climate Justice Committee. We passed Resolution 5272 back in 2016, of course. In my opinion, just as one of the committee members and working on environmental justice and climate justice issues, it feels like we are running up a muddy hill in flip-flops. And I would also say that this is such an important intersecting issue with other social issues that we are dealing with right now in our community. And we do claim ourselves as leaders in climate justice and environmental justice. However, I think we need to take more of a proactive stance within our district in ensuring that our textbooks are mentioning climate change, students are learning about activism, and they are learning how to mitigate the climate crisis. Thank you. Go ahead, Amy.
Thank you, Gerald. Hi, I'm Amy Higgs. I use she, her pronouns. I'm executive director of the Eco School Network and a parent of 2 PPS students. A year ago, the Climate Justice Committee studied the district's resource conservation policy, which is outdated and never had an AD. Mike Rosen and I had each testified separately about the need to update that policy. So along with my colleague, Jane Kummelt, we decided to take a crack at updating it. We reframed it around climate change and started conversations with staff. We planned to present it in March, but COVID came, and so we spent more time on community input gathering. I want to appreciate the district staff who shared input: Dan Young, Aaron Pressberg, Nicole Berg, Monica Fleischer, Whitney Ellersick, Ben Dandino, Terry Johnson, Brandon Conrud, Terry Brady, and Emily Courtnage. I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see. Okay, hopefully you can all see that in a moment. We appreciate the support and feedback shared by PPS students, public agencies, community organizations, including those serving frontline communities, local scientists, and PPS parents and teachers. So this draft has been reviewed or is being reviewed by these groups, and their comments have been incorporated or resolved in the most part. I'm excited about the steps the board and staff have taken to prioritize climate justice education. It was great hearing about the update at the last board meeting. And at the same time, as the largest district in Oregon, our greenhouse gas emissions are significant. They haven't actually been measured yet, but we know that the ultimate impacts of the district's emissions don't fall evenly on our community members. The climate crisis response policy is basically a draft roadmap toward a place where PPS is a model of climate action and climate justice, where students see climate solutions in action at their school, and where they trust in their community's willingness to take action for their future. So the policy is divided into 2 big goals: emissions reductions and resilience, and engagement and preparedness, with specific targets under each goal. The first goal is emissions reductions and resilience. We propose that PPS reduce carbon emissions by 50% from 2010 levels by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050. This is the same target as the city's climate emergency declaration. And we propose making PPS systems more resilient to the climate change impacts that are now unavoidable. The next big goal is engagement and preparedness. So we propose that all PPS students and staff have opportunities to learn about and engage in climate solutions, climate change preparedness, and climate justice practices. So diving into the first big goal, we can reduce emissions and boost resilience by making adjustments in all of these 6 areas: grounds, OMF, new construction, transportation, purchasing, and food systems. We can shrink emissions from these sources, maximize the carbon absorbing potential of school grounds, and also enhance the ability of PPS grounds and facilities to adapt and recover from climate extremes. Just to share a couple examples of the targets we provided in the policy language are things like planting more trees, not building new fossil fuel infrastructure, staff incentives to walk, bike, ride the bus, or telecommute, reducing food waste, and many more. So that's our first big goal. The next major priority is engagement and preparedness. And the areas we're focusing on are campus action, frontline community support, climate justice curriculum, professional development, and communications. A couple examples include hands-on opportunities for students to learn and practice climate solutions, and supporting students and families from frontline communities in preparing and responding to the most likely climate change impacts. I just want to emphasize that our community is ready for PPS to take this on, from third graders and their parents and teachers right up through our city leaders. We invite PPS to be an active partner in confronting the climate crisis. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. We see that everything you all have been considering for your work plan is important, and we know that you all are volunteers. And in deciding which policies to prioritize this year, I just ask that you consider the urgency of each one. This policy addresses an existential threat that's already playing out, and it's projected to get much worse. So this is about PPS being responsible for our impacts. It's about equity for our frontline communities and equity between generations. It's about health and safety. It's about risk management and protection of district assets. And it's also about science and common sense. I want to thank you each for giving so much of your time and brain power and hearts to the PPS community. And I hope this draft is just a helpful starting point so that PPS can become the climate partner that our community and students need. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to be getting public comment at the end of the meeting as well, and I suspect most of it will be about this policy. But let's focus on the whole list of all of the policies that are not mandated. There are quite a few of them, and some of them have been identified as some of them we already, as a board, have identified as high priorities. So, Liz, do you want to talk about any of this section?
Can we get them back up again? Yeah, thank you, Roseanne. Liz, you're muted.
Thank you. I can check the box on that one for this meeting, I hope. These recommendations for policy work come from a variety of sources. So I'll just walk them through it at a high level, and then I think the committee can discuss some of the prioritization and hear from students on the student rep policy. But formal complaint policy is already in process. It's on the agenda today, although I'm not sure we're going to get to it, but so I think the committee is aware of that. Same with the real estate policy. Enrollment comes from, I think, from a board perspective and needing work on this area. And Rita, I may let you or Scott speak to that, but there have been some stops and starts. Certainly a year ago, we were, I don't know, it's COVID times. Is it a year ago? Several months ago, when we were all in the same room together, there was some work that started on some of the enrollment related policies and school boundaries, and I actually am not sure that I'm very well equipped to speak to the scope of the work to be done there, but it is work that has been queued up for quite some time and started and stopped. Code of ethics, I would put in that same category of work that has been discussed for some time, and we haven't gotten to, as we talk about capacity. That's just one that we need to build out. The code of ethics, the we started, and I'll own the delay on that in the legal team. So it's been on our to-do list for a while, and we are committed to getting a draft ready for whenever the committee wants to put it in the queue. Professional conduct between adults and students, the board, of course, did much heavy lifting on that in 2018. I think what we've found is just a few areas, and we knew this would happen, right? I remember the conversations in front of the committee at the time that this was our best shot on developing a policy that, you know, OSBA didn't have a model of. We looked at a few other models, but there was a lot of original drafting that went into this on the part of the committee. And so having lived with it for a year and also seen it transition, seeing the district transition to comprehensive distance learning, there are some places where it needs to be tweaked. But we know that there's always a lot to talk about in that policy. It's dense and robust and very important, and part of training for lots of populations every year. So it's an important one to keep very much up to date. Climate crisis response, I cannot say anything more than these eloquent speakers here today. I think you know the history on that. Indemnification relates to some employee groups for expenses incurred that are not included in the statutory Tort Claims Act. And there have been 2 different board related inquiries about that. The student rep duties, I don't know, Rita, if you'd like to have Nathaniel or one of the other representative students here speak to the scope of what may be involved there. I think they'll do a much better job than I will on that, and they're here.
Nathaniel, do you or one of the other students want to speak to that?
Yeah,
very briefly.
We've got a number of things that we're looking at. It's mostly just taking out things that haven't been working in the past, moving some things to bylaws, just trying to make the overall structure more efficient and well, representative of what we're actually trying to do here. I believe Parker wanted to say something.
Yes, it's basically just revising the current policy, taking out some redundancies and some limiting factors that have become apparent as this the policy in its current form was implemented in 2017 or 2018, I believe, very recently. And we've sort of gone through and pressure tested the policy in its current form and found some less than optimal stipulations and things in that policy that don't really represent how we'd like to conduct ourselves as a body.
Yeah, and I'd also include that one of the main goals is to reduce barriers and promote equity inside the policy as well.
So can I ask
for student reps how much student input you think would be needed on, you're talking mostly, it sounds like tweaks as opposed to huge changes. How much student input would be needed on going forward?
Sure. There's a few more substantive changes, but there is an engagement plan that is being developed by our staff liaison, Yen, who I don't believe is in this meeting. But we do have a comprehensive plan to engage students in the works. But to more directly answer your question, we would like as much student engagement as possible, but as much as we can get, really.
Yeah, and I'd also like to note that given that last time I don't believe there was a particularly high level of engagement, that it is important that we go through those steps this time.
Okay.
Thank you guys very much for that. And then the computer use policy is, it's in need of updating. The technology has changed. It just hasn't been updated in a while, and particularly, again, highlighted in some of this virtual space, that having clear the computer use policy sits over the acceptable use AD, which is a fairly standard governing policy procedure document for organizations. Both of those will need some revision. I think that's fairly light on the board, and I think it's fairly light on engagement because it tends to be kind of defined by the technology, but we will continue to assess that as we move forward. Then the OSBA section DB is the first one that's still in process. It's, I think, appropriately prioritized pretty far down the list. And the other OSBA revisions, sit in the queue, in that OSBA process queue. So there may be some ways to strategize how to fill some small gaps in agendas with that work if we think it can be done quickly, but and to accelerate that work, I think there's going to have to be, if it's going to get done in over a several year time period at this rate. But I cannot look at that list of really important policy areas and tell you I think it should come ahead of it, because I don't.
Okay, so I'm looking at the clock. It's now 5:38, and we have 10 minutes worth of public comment. So we've got, 12 minutes left. So I'm going to pose a few questions. First question: is there anything on this long list that anybody thinks we should not do? Anything we can just lop off the list? Okay.
Well, the other question is, were there other candidates that didn't make the list? And don't hurt don't hurt me for bringing that up.
I think the other thing I would add is that there may be things that arise during the year that's unexpected that we don't yet see. I don't think staff is holding back on you. I think that the other areas may be what board members have contemplated. I think the staff have provided their recommendations based on what we know today.
So I
think for example, parent engagement policies, I think, are really outdated. I don't think it's a house on fire, but they're out there around site councils. I think LSACs are still in policy. For those of you who have really long memories, there's no there's no accountability around any of these. Some of them are state law, some of them are not. So that's just a body of work out there. Again, I'm not arguing for it to displace any of these, the ones on Earth, but I just want to bring that up in terms of future work. And I'm sure there's a couple of other areas out there as well.
So I raised two policies at the last board meeting that I think are worth putting on the agenda. One is the board members' elections, and there's a state law that passed a couple years ago that was designed to promote greater equity and representation on boards. So I'd like to at least have a discussion about that in the committee, and we may decide that we don't want to pursue it, but I think it merits at a minimum a discussion. And the second one, this isn't a wholesale policy review. In fact, it's probably just a minor series of amendments, and I'm happy to bring more detail. But our school, and I know we did a fair amount of work on the school naming and mascot policy around the 2.5 years ago around the Franklin mascot change. But we've had this past year, I think, a real call to action around the names of many of our schools, and the policy as it was written. And given that I was chair at the time, I'll own this. Is not really set up to take a host of names. It's more very selective, and it's also very just to the school, very focused on just the school community. And many of the issues that have been raised are much broader than the particular school community. So I have, and I'm happy to send them around, but I don't think it's a heavy lift. Again, I think a lot of the good work was done in the previous policy. Also, I have something, a potential revision to that same policy around school-based art, and this came out of the grant murals, which our policy talks about a whole host of symbols, mascots, names, but doesn't really address art. So I've again, I don't think it's not a wholesale rewrite, but just some amendments to update the policy. So those are two things that I would like to have raised by the committee this year.
Okay, so not only have we not cut the list down, we've now added 3 additional policies to the queue. And I think there's a good case to be made for all of these, but I think we also need to be realistic. So I'm going to make a suggestion. And let me preface this suggestion this way. It is now the beginning of October. This committee has been in operation for, 2.5 months. This is, I haven't counted them up, but I'm guessing this is the 4th, 5th meeting that we've had. Thus far, we haven't, we're still working on a work plan. Let's just start there. I think we need to acknowledge that the work that this committee is engaged in does not lend itself to rapid resolution, and we need to do due diligence on all of these policies. And in order to do that, we need to have the time. So my suggestion is, we have been meeting every 3 weeks for 2 hours. And it seems to me that it's pretty clear that is not an adequate amount of time to actually make real progress. I can tell you that staff put in many hours preparing for these meetings, and more often than not, by the end of the week, end of each meeting, there is at least one agenda item that we haven't even mentioned, never mind gone into in depth. So we're eating up an enormous amount of staff time that ends up having to be replicated 3 weeks later. And even then, there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to get through the agenda. So I will own the fact that I can be a little more draconian about meeting facilitation. And if I have your permission to do that, I would happily do that. But I think the fact is that a 2-hour meeting is not sufficient to get through these agendas. And if we just shorten the agenda for every meeting to actually make it doable in 2 hours, we will never even make a dent in this list. So here's my suggestion. I would recommend that we increase the amount of time for these meetings to 3 hours. Is there any objection?
So I guess it depends on where the hour goes, because if it's in the middle of the workday, that's will be hard for me. And also hard for anybody who works a regular shift to participate in work shift to participate in the work, and for students once we're back to.
Well, okay. But let me clarify my suggestion. Instead of making these meetings 4 to 6, we make them 4 to 7.
Can we shift them so that they're not on the same weeks as the board meetings? I mean, it's just hard if you have two double duties. I guess one other thing, and maybe this is just a suggestion, and it's not in opposition to the 3-hour meeting, but if we had the documents earlier, then I think that there could be more exchange of information or input prior to the meeting, and sort of like, so we have more efficient meetings. So for example, like the real estate policy, if I had it in Word document and I'd gotten it last week, I could have, sent down, like, here's some proposed changes that I've got. And that way people have a chance to look at them in advance, or staff has a chance to say, that's a bad idea, or that's a good idea, or you may want to change this. I don't know, just maybe that will make the meetings, because it's sort of like we get here and then there's some high level things we're talking about, and then just some like much more mechanicals. So just another thought.
So you're getting the material Thursday prior to the Monday meeting. And a lot of the materials are dependent on staff work. So we need to make sure that we come up with a cadence that's actually doable. So I'm going to, Liz, you just unmuted yourself.
Well, just from the workflow perspective of how staff works through that, you heard Mila make reference to, I sent you things on Monday. So we ask those who are working on who are the subject matter experts working on policies, to have their materials in by Monday, in order to get them to the board members by Thursday. And if we move that up, and we do need time between the staff submission and the distribution to board, they go through a number of sets of eyes, they get asked questions, Guadalupe gets to see them. He's the one who usually gets shorted on review. Also, if we get pinched, which is not best practice, and we really try not to do that to him. If we move up the Thursday deadline, what we're doing is we're compressing the number of days from the committee meeting for work to get done before the next round of documents flow. So when we talk about like 3 weeks versus 2 weeks, you can create that same compression of work time that generates the next revision. There just has to be enough time in between to do that and to get the documents out. And I want to acknowledge that I know there are some, I think we did get them out last week by Thursday. And I want to acknowledge that sometimes we have missed that, and that creates compression for you all. And you donate an incredible amount of your lives to this organization, in addition to all the other things that you do in work and community involvement and family. So I want to acknowledge that as well. It's not just staff compression, it's board compression, but how we think about how the work flows, and there has to be some time to get it done before we're processing and generating documents. And you do have to have meaningful time to review them. So,
right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is a question for board work in general. Is getting off this merry-go-round rat race for both staff and board of, let's pretend like it's Thursday before Monday, but really it's the Monday after that. Because if we can get that extra weekend there, we'll be more efficient. But we can't. It's like the walking slower to go faster kind of metaphor. But if we're constantly on staff trying to crank things out for a 3 or 4 day turnaround for board, then we're less efficient when we get to the actual meeting. So
So are you talking about making it a 4-week cadence rather than 3-week between meetings?
I'm talking about instead of a Thursday before the following Monday, if Monday's our meeting time, making it a Thursday before the next Monday after that, to allow for more of a review, more of getting the questions asked, more of the, is this a good idea? Well, no, because of that, before we get to the actual meeting. And then the meeting, we're more able to move quicker.
Okay, but that actually, that's going to cut down the staff production of the original document by a week. So instead of having 2 weeks to produce the documents for review, the subject matter experts are only going to have a week.
Well, no, I think it's the other way around. So whenever our next meeting is scheduled for, and so you know, whatever Monday that is, we've got a deadline of the Thursday before that. That was it, 3 weeks from now. Staff essentially has a deadline for cranking out a bunch of material. Well, let's delay that meeting for a week. And then we have a longer review time, and we should be able to be more efficient in our work in the meeting. That's the theory, to get more stuff done.
Okay, I'm not understanding how this would work. And so let me stop here.
Okay.
Because it's
we can discuss this offline, but
let's do this offline. But I'll just leave this as clearly we can't keep doing it the way we're doing it because we're not going to make progress.
Yeah.
And
I just want to make clear, I'm not asking staff to do all their work an extra week ahead of time for our next meeting. Okay. I'm talking about extending it, going the other direction.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to, because I'm still not understanding how that would actually, how we'd actually find an additional week in any of this. But okay, let's talk about this offline. Okay. And so I'm going to ask, do we have an agreement? Can we just agree here that at least for the next scheduled policy committee meeting that we extended by an hour? Can we agree to that?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the date?
Roseanne, what's the date? So it's 3 weeks from October 5th.
It's the 26th. No.
26th.
Yes. October 26th.
Okay. All right. And so we're doing that on the fly. We're going to have to check and make sure that it's going to work for staff. But for the time being, let's say we're going to have a 3-hour meeting next time around, and then Kara's going to have to work some magic about future meetings.
Okay. I will insist on an hourly 3-minute get up and walk around.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop us here so that we can take public comment. And it's just for the people who are testifying, you have 2 minutes to testify, and given the late hour, we're going to have to strictly enforce the 2-minute limit. Okay, Kara, who do we have?
Yes. We have Tim Swinehart.
Okay, hi there. Thank you. I'm Tim Swinehart. I'm a teacher at Lincoln High School. I'm a founding member of the Climate Justice Committee and a parent of 2 PPS students. Thank you all for hearing all this. We're all trying to do way too much right now. And, so the conversation tonight about what's mandated and what's not. This climate response policy is not mandated, but I would like to argue that it's still necessary. We're developing curriculum and classes right now in Portland Public Schools in line with 5272. And, we are continuing to lead the nation in that regard. But we have to remember that schools and facilities present a hidden curriculum. So we're working on an explicit curriculum, but we have this hidden curriculum that's not keeping up with that. And this really this hidden curriculum teaches students whether we're serious about our work and our commitments to climate justice. I think that giving this attention this year amid this really, huge docket of other things that you have to do, it would recommit in a way to 5272. It would allow for students to be involved in the implementation of this, I think, in a way that would be really important. I think one of the most important things we can do amidst a pandemic right now and everything else that students have on their plates is to just really try to inspire hope, that change in this world is possible. And I think that showing them that change can happen at an institutional level at PPS is one way that we can do that. And it can get back to that core principle of 5272 that I've talked to people around the country about, which is that, we are working to inspire students to see themselves as activists for social and environmental justice. So thanks again for your time tonight and for considering this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We have Sophia England.
Hi, I'm Sophia England. I'm a senior at Madison High School. My pronouns are she, her. Okay. I would like to thank the Portland Public School Board Policy Committee for this opportunity to speak. As a student, on behalf of many students, those of us with plans for our futures would like to see this as the world's priority, let alone PPS. To be a student learning about the threats of climate change and the massive shifts necessary to avoid the irreversible chaos that the very schools teaching us this content not take the crisis seriously is hypocritical and demonstrates that these goals are unrealistic and intense. PPS claims it's for racial justice and equity, but as the crisis is affecting frontline communities far more, for PPS to say this policy isn't their priority makes clear that those people aren't either. The rebuilding of Madison High School is a perfect opportunity to make a sustainable building and set the pace for transitions in the rest of the schools, as well as an awesome opportunity to make the most diverse school in Portland and also located on 82nd, a leader in this movement. But long before the school was torn down, they wouldn't even consider the proposals from staff and students. We understand that these are big commitments and that they aren't cheap, but to not commit would be to continue to endanger our futures. Students and teachers have had to pushing for action on behalf of PPS for years now, taking time away from their education because of the mess your generations have left behind. But you still owe it to us to do everything in your power to prevent climate change. Our entire existence rests on this crisis. Your job is to raise an empowered generation that is set up for success. To ignore this will not be doing your job. You know this is the right thing to do. Please don't be on the wrong side. We're counting on you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ray Blackbird.
Good evening, PPS Policy Committee. My name is Ray Blackbird. I'm 17 years old and a senior at Madison High School. And tonight I'm going to tell you about something that I'm sure you've all heard 100 times before. Probably even from kids like me, stressed out and tired of telling adults what they already know. The climate crisis is here, and anything less than priority won't really cut it anymore. So I'm using these 2 minutes to speak to you about my priorities, the future of my classmates and brothers, our forests and schools, and the future that we all share is at stake. I'm currently in the climate justice elective at my high school, and I'm really happy to be there, to be learning with a class of my peers about how our environment has been so taken for granted as to show every summer with record-breaking temperatures, longer fire seasons, and rising oceans. But the truth is, all of us should be learning about climate change. Never before has a generation been faced with a crisis like this. And right now, there is no required curriculum centered around educating young people, the most affected generation. But this is a problem that we can all fix. Access to education and knowledge about fighting climate change can be for everyone. So I'm here speaking for my classmates and all those that are going to come after me. Together, we can implement district-wide climate justice education. Privileged white students like myself are largely the face and voice of the youth climate activism movement in Portland. However, low-income Black and Brown students are generally the most impacted by climate change. And in order to build a more inclusive future for our education system, we need to include everyone in fighting this battle. Implementing the climate crisis response policy would be a great first step. So let's take it. Thank you so much for your time and understanding. We can overcome this crisis together.
Erica Albarca.
Hello, my name's Erica Alabarca. That's A-L-A-B-A-R-C-A, she, her pronouns. I'm a 7th grade language arts social studies teacher at Rosary Heights Middle School. I've been a teacher in the district for 12 years, also a member of the Climate Justice Committee. I want to stress the urgency of this moment. We have catastrophic fires, devastating tropical storms, droughts. We had a hurricane that sat an entire day over the Bahamas, and the Amazon forest on fire. Not only that, the tundra in Siberia. If we're not taking drastic change now by 2030, we know that we've reached the tipping point. And we don't even need to wait 9 years to see what that future entails. We are living elements of it right now. In a conversation I had with James Holt, a member of the NESPERS and one-time director of the Confluence Environmental Project, he talked about the shift to climate resiliency, meaning that we need to develop ways to withstand the climate crisis we face. Now imagine that Native Americans who are spearheading some of the newest innovations in science to protect native species, and also carrying thousands of years of science and observation embedded in their culture and traditions, are the ones having to provide this sound reality check of what it means to prepare for our futures. I also want to point out the portrait of our graduate that is such an obvious focus of our curriculum and instruction. We have ideas of collaborative problem solving, critical thinking, transformative racial equity leaders. If a portrait of a graduate is what it's supposed to be, it should be plain to see that climate justice touches all of these elements. And when I was a student, at my students' age, the conversation about environment was much different, but the idea that change needed to happen was there. And 10 years or 12 years ago when it started, students also wondered what we could do with the environment. And now I have students today who are face to face with the climate crisis who are also asking, what can we do? While others are answering probably nothing. What will they have to tell their children about how we didn't do enough for the environment? Well, it was never made a priority. That's not really an acceptable answer. So I know you have a lot on your plate. I just want to make a couple points. The policies you make set a direction and articulate a path to getting there, but the policies also unintentionally block the things that are most needed for students and educators. So please be careful of those policies. And also you have educators and students who are in this with energy and dedication, and that's an asset. We work with these kids every day. They're strong, they're resilient, they're ready to step up. They want to engage in these difficult situations and conversations. So please make it a priority that their voices are heard, not in appreciations, not in acknowledgements, but in actual action that support, or if only clear a path to the work we've made it their job to do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other speakers?
One more, Rachel Haynes. I don't actually see your name on here, so I just wanted to call it in case I did miss it.
Okay, thank you for everybody who spoke. Thank you for everybody's patience today. We will get back to you with an updated calendar invite for the next meeting. You know, as Scott says, forward, forward, forward. So I'm going to close us down here. I'm late for my next meeting. So thank you, everybody, and see you in a few weeks. Stay safe and healthy, everybody. Thanks.
The student reps, me and Jillian, on any emails that are related to this committee.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.